Does Sean McDermott have what it takes to lead the Buffalo Bills to their first Super Bowl victory? We're going to break that down on this week's episode of TWB.
You are now listening to the Watering Buffalo podcast with your hosts, Justin Goddard and Andrew Chang.
Bills Mafia, welcome into today's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast. My name is Justin. I will be your host tonight. Started recording with Andrew, who's usually with me here, and we had some serious technical difficulty as we got about halfway through the episode. A real gem of an episode, so we're going to save that content for later. He had a computer failure. So I'm going to be rocking out solo tonight, talking about Sean McDermott. But before we get started, this show is brought to you by the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network. Tons of great shows on the network, so make sure you're checking everybody out, different flavors every day of the week. And also make sure you're checking out our website, thewanderingbuff.com. We got some articles that we've been writing through the off season. Jake's doing great work with some articles, some merch, some cool stuff going on there. So tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about Sean McDermott, who we've kind of touched on in the past as we were, breaking down positions and the organization and whatnot. But I feel like we haven't really put the spotlight on McDermott enough. And, there was a talk around the town of, is he on the hot seat? Is this, Super Bowl or bust year? Is he loved by the organization and going to be around forever? You got full ends of the spectrum from Bills Mafia, and honestly I think part of it is we're a super passionate fan base, and we don't take the summer off like a lot of fan bases do. So when it's this real slow time of year, we got to find something to talk about, right? So a couple of weeks ago, McDermott and Bean get that lockstep extension, and essentially keeps them locked up here till 2027. Little bit of disclaimer there, and these contracts don't really matter for coaches. It's not the same as players, where you give a bad extension on a player, then you have a dead cap, and it can really hamper you in future years. We see coaching changes all the time under contract. It's just a matter of these billionaire owners having to eat some money personally, which I'm sure they're still not glad to do, but we see it happen every year in the NFL. We'll see it happen again. And today I'm going to kind of talk about why I don't have that concern with McDermott, and I don't think you should either. And kind of what I look towards in the past to feel that way, and what I look for in the future. Pretty easy to start out with. We come from a franchise that went 17 years without making the playoffs, and it seems like we're so quick to forget about all of these coaches that we had through here. The Rex Ryans, Doug Marones, Chan Gailey. There's just so many of them. And just the first point I want to bring up here is the continuity alone. And I know that's like a big Bean McDermott phrasing there, but it matters here, I think. And just to have the same system, be able to build one year over the next and not have constant changes, I think that's a big thing that this organization values. I think it's something that I'm guessing Terry Pegula values, just because we've seen so much continuity in this organization. Obviously, kind of the record speaks for itself. The playoff success that we've had speaks for itself. Going from an organization that, had the giant playoff drought, and then has made the playoffs every year since he's been the coach here, except for one. And that year, obviously being Josh Allen's rookie year, kind of still in the state of turning over the roster. Remember, just the previous year, we're talking about, are the Bills tanking? Do we have to, saddle up to be the number one pick? All that blah, 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 just selling off players left and right. And then after Josh Allen's rookie year, you just see, with Bean's help of building great rosters, but the way McDermott has been leading this team year over year, it just kind of always seems like this roster's not going to get better. The team's not going to get any better. Last year was the year to do it. And then we go through another offseason. Bean makes some tremendous moves. And then we're right back in the topic of conversation there. So that's the big one for me, is kind of just the way McDermott has brought this franchise back to relevancy, right? Just for so many years, by Thanksgiving, we're playing meaningless football games, and there's some years where you make it a little bit past Thanksgiving and you get to be in the hunt graphic, but you knew in your heart that, there wasn't a chance. And I will say a lot of this goes into the front office, the organization itself, kind of not being able to bring in the right players, missing on draft picks. But what we see being able to do now, I think, has a ton to do with McDermott and the culture that's been created, this winning mindset of, you go back to a player like Mario Williams and having to overpay for a guy like Mario Williams because, you had to get people to chase money because they didn't want to come to Buffalo. And then we fast forward to 2023 offseason, and we got guys like Leonard Floyd and Poona Ford, signing fairly small deals because they want to come here. They want to play in this organization for McDermott, for the Bills, try to bring home a championship. And people outside the organization are even buying into what's going on here in Buffalo. And that kind of creates this self-sustaining ecosystem of, you're going to lose some talent along the way, but people are going to continue to want to play here because of the success they're seeing with the team, because of what's happening here. So I think McDermott is a huge part of that in what we see going on with the success in Buffalo right now. Like I said, tons of other moving pieces with it. I think Bean's also doing a tremendous job. But what McDermott has been able to get out of this roster year over year has been impressive. And I'd say the number one thing for me that makes me believe in McDermott, both in the short term and the long term, is that first season that he took over as head coach, 2017. And, like I mentioned, we have everybody talking about, are the Bills tanking this year? We're selling off pieces left and right. Sammy Watkins, Ronald Darby, just going in with this depleted roster, bunch of street free agents at wide receiver. I'd be hard pressed to even name them all right now. And taking that squad year one, when everybody's talking about, you got a rookie coach, this team's tanking, all that. And to be able to go, I believe it was 9-7, and granted, they kind of backed into the playoffs. It took some help from Andy Dalton and the Bengals to make it happen for us. But in year one of his coaching tenure, to be able to take a roster that, was bad enough that people are wondering if you're tanking, and bring this organization out of the depths of that playoff drought with that roster, to go 9-7 and make the playoffs. Yeah, sure, it was a pitiful playoff performance, and we lost in the first round. But I think what he was able to do in that season not only bought him so much goodwill from the organization, but the fan base, the locker room of some of these pieces that were there for the start of this. And that kind of just snowballed. It gives you that opportunity to have that follow-up season, 6-10, Josh Allen's rookie year, as they were actually starting the rebuild. Now you've got that playoff monkey off your back. Now you can go in and do the rebuild, and we've just seen it year over year. I mean, we're talking about this franchise was starting out with receivers like Reuben Foster, and Kelvin Benjamin comes in, and just all kinds of these guys that I can't even name them all at this point because Deontay Thompson was in there. And just to be able to take that roster, and he bought himself that year of goodwill so they could take their time retooling it. And then by 2018-2019 season, Josh's second year, we're already talking about a perennial playoff team that they're building. With that success, you see all these other players come in, Bean making his move, and it's just been a team that's continued to grow under the leadership of Sean McDermott. It just seems to me like he really has the team buying in, and recently there's been kind of some chatter out there. Again, I think this is just Bills Mafia, and we're passionate year round of it, is Sean McDermott losing the locker room with this whole Stephon Diggs situation going on. I guess I can't really fully comment on that because we don't fully know what the situation is still. But to me, I'd have a very hard time believing that when you have these legitimate, like, all-pro players on the team that are fully buying in and wanting to come back. Jordan Phillips, Shaq Lawson, Von Miller, Josh Allen, all these guys, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, all these guys buying into what McDermott's doing here. It's just really hard for me to have, some weird one-off player issue going on to tell me that McDermott's losing the locker room. I find it very hard to believe that. So for me, I do think that Sean McDermott is going to be the coach that can take this team to the promised land. Will he get it done this year? We'll discuss that after the break. Stick around.
Hey, this is Bills Vader. Now back to the show.
Welcome back into this week's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast. We're talking about Sean McDermott this week, and if he's the coach that's going to finally get the Bills over the hump. Before the break, I kind of hinted at, I do think McDermott is the coach that's going to bring a Lombardi to Buffalo. Now, does that mean that I think that it has to happen this year? No. I think kind of the point of this episode for me is just kind of looking at where the Bills came from and where we are now since Sean McDermott has taken over as head coach, and then kind of being able to look around the league and see, just how many coaches actually win Super Bowls. And the prime example of this out there is Andy Reid, and all the time that he spent in Philadelphia not being able to, seal the deal and finish the championship. And he goes to Kansas City and has this absolute tremendous success. My fear for people, calling for McDermott to be fired, is a situation like that where, sometimes it just takes a few more years than we want it to finally get over the hump. And we see the success a guy like Andy Reid is having now in Kansas City. And I guess kind of just preaching patience on this. I mean, we're Bills Mafia. We're diehard. We were selling out games when our team was wallowing in mediocrity. People showing up for games shirtless in December games when the team's already eliminated from the playoffs. Like, we did all that for 17 years. And now we have this good GM. We have good coaching staff. We're having some playoff success, and we got like this portion of the fan base that's ready to jump ship just because we haven't sealed the deal yet. It just, for me, if we hung in there through 17 years of not making the playoffs, I'm willing to give McDermott and the success that he had a little bit longer of a leash than what are we talking, 5-6 years. That's not to say that I don't think the Bills can get it done this year. I don't think the window's closing. Just kind of speaking on the difficulty of winning a Super Bowl. 31 teams are upset every year that they didn't get it done. Some to varying degrees, based on what type of contender you are, how close you're actually supposed to be. But the goal for every professional football player in the league every year is to win a Super Bowl. You got to get some luck. You got to get some health. You got to get hot at the right time. And, last year really felt like a year that the team could get it done, going into the season. But just kind of looking at all the factors, we love saying on this show, it's not excuses. It's just kind of explanations. It's just facts of what happened. I mean, the Bills over McDermott's tenure have been very fortunate to have, for the most part, great luck on the injury front. For the most part, the biggest thing we saw was Trey White having an ACL for the first 4 years of McDermott's tenure. And then we look at all of the injuries that piled up last year. You have Josh Allen playing through an injury the whole season. Micah Hyde lost for the season. Von Miller, who you brought in to be kind of your push down the stretch closer, go out on Thanksgiving Day. There were so many injuries. I saw, I forget who it was. It was, I believe, Greg Thompson over on Cover One, speaking on just how many injuries we dealt with last year, that he forgot that Dane Jackson was taken off the field and on a stretcher from a hit that he went. Tremaine Edmonds caught him. There was just so many injuries that piled up last year. I think if we can have some semblance of health, this is again a team that they're putting out there that can get over the hump, and a leader in Sean McDermott that can get it done. And what makes me feel really positive about this organization right now is that if it doesn't happen this year, we still have Josh Allen as our quarterback. We still have all kinds of pieces in place. We have a GM that's making moves year after year, and who I believe is a great leader of men in Sean McDermott, that is, given time, going to take this team to the promised land. So that's going to wrap it up tonight. Doing a little bit of a shorter episode, kind of thinking on our feet here with Andrew's computer problems that we had. But stick around. We're going to be back next week. Hopefully we have his computer figured out by next week, because I'm really excited for the show concept that we had for tonight. So make sure you're tuning in next week. Thank you again for joining me on this week's episode. Make sure you're checking out all those other shows on the Fanbase Podcast Network, and take a moment to share, subscribe to the show. Make sure you're not missing anything. Check out thewanderingbuff.com. All kinds of cool merch, articles, things like that. Thank you again for joining me, and go Bills.